Colorado Territory, 1875. The last light of day painted the Rocky Mountain foothills in gold as dust swirled around the hooves of a chestnut quarter horse. Heath Wakefield pulled his bandana over his nose, squinting against the setting sun. At 26, he'd already seen enough of life's cruelties to last several lifetimes. The war between the states had taken his father, the fever had claimed his mother, and the unforgiving frontier had stolen whatever softness remained in his heart. "No sense in dreaming about what you can't have, boy," he muttered to his horse, Rusty, as they crested a ridge overlooking the small settlement of Pinecrest. Below, lamplight winked on in cabin windows as families gathered for evening meals. The sight made something twist painfully in Heath's chest. He nudged Rusty forward, reminding himself of the truth he'd learned the hard way. A man alone survived. A man with attachments buried those he loved. The saloon lights beckoned as Heath rode into town, his lean, muscular frame casting a long shadow. He'd been hired to help drive a herd north to the railroad, and tonight was his last chance for a warm meal before weeks on the trail. Dismounting outside the Frontier Saloon, he ran a hand through his sandy brown hair and adjusted his worn Stetson. His face, though weathered from sun and wind, retained a youthfulness that belied the hardness in his hazel eyes. Heath secured Rusty and pushed through the batwing doors. The familiar sounds of clinking glasses, drunken laughter, and a slightly out-of-tune piano washed over him. He claimed a corner table, ordered whiskey and stew, and settled in to observe the room with the watchfulness that had kept him alive these past years. That's when he saw her. She stood by the bar, clutching a small carpetbag, looking utterly out of place. Her deep blue traveling dress was dusty but well-made, her chestnut hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Even from across the room, Heath could see she was beautiful and desperate. "Please, sir," she was saying to the bartender, her voice carrying in a momentary lull of conversation. "I've nowhere else to go. I heard Mr. Peterson needs household help, and I'm willing to work hard." The bartender shook his head. "Old man Peterson died 3 months back, miss. His place was sold to cover his debts." Her shoulders slumped, and Heath felt an unwelcome stirring of sympathy. It wasn't his concern. Tomorrow he'd be gone, heading north with the cattle drive. Whatever trouble this woman found herself in had nothing to do with him. He was halfway through his stew when the saloon's doors burst open again. 3 rough-looking men swaggered in, scanning the room until their eyes landed on the young woman. Heath recognized their type immediately. Trouble. "Well, look what we found, boys," the tallest one sneered. "Told you she'd head for the nearest town." The woman paled visibly, backing against the bar. "Leave me be, I've nothing you want." "Your daddy might disagree," the man replied, advancing toward her. "He's offering a mighty fine reward to bring his wayward daughter home." Heath knew he should look away. Getting involved would only complicate things, maybe get him killed. He had no stake in this fight. But something in the woman's terrified expression reminded him painfully of his younger sister before the consumption took her, desperate, cornered, with no one to turn to. Before he could reconsider, Heath found himself on his feet. "The lady doesn't seem interested in your company, friend." The saloon went quiet. The man turned slowly, sizing up Heath with calculating eyes. "This ain't your business, cowboy." Heath's hand hovered near his holster. "I'm making it my business." What followed happened quickly. The man reached for his gun, but Heath was faster. A warning shot into the ceiling sent everyone diving for cover. In the chaos, Heath grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward the back door. "If you want to live, come with me now," he hissed, already regretting his intervention. They burst into the alley behind the saloon, running toward the livery where Rusty was tethered. Behind them, shouts and the pounding of boots signaled pursuit. "I can't thank you enough," the woman gasped as Heath helped her onto his horse. "Don't thank me yet," he replied grimly, swinging up behind her. "We've got a long night ahead, and I don't even know your name." "Rose," she said, holding tight as Rusty bolted forward. "Rose Langley. I'm 23 years old and I'm running from my stepfather." Heath urged Rusty faster as they cleared the town limits. "I'm Heath Wakefield, and I just ruined any chance I had of joining that cattle drive tomorrow." As they disappeared into the darkness of the foothills, Heath felt the weight of his decision settling over him. He'd broken his own cardinal rule, stay uninvolved. Now he was responsible for this woman, this Rose, and whatever trouble followed her. By dawn, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and Pinecrest. Heath found a sheltered clearing near a stream to rest Rusty and take stock of their situation. Rose dismounted gracefully despite her obvious exhaustion, smoothing her rumpled blue dress. "You need to tell me exactly what I've got myself into," Heath said, gathering wood for a small fire. The spring morning carried a chill that cut through his duster. Rose sank onto a fallen log, her chestnut hair coming loose from its pins to frame her face. In the early light, Heath noticed details he'd missed in the dim saloon. The light dusting of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her jaw, and eyes the color of summer sage. "My mother died 2 years ago," she began, her voice steady despite her evident fatigue. 6 months later, my father married Cordelia Hayes, a widow from Denver. Last year, my father died in a mining accident, leaving everything to her. Heath listened silently as he coaxed flames from the kindling. "My stepfather, Cordelia's brother, moved in to help manage the estate," Rose continued, her expression darkening. "Victor Hayes is a cruel man with gambling debts. He arranged for me to marry one of his creditors, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for burying wives." "So you ran," Heath concluded, understanding her desperation. Rose nodded. "2 nights ago, I took what little money my mother had hidden away and fled. I had hoped to find work in Pinecrest, perhaps as a teacher or housekeeper, something respectable until I could establish myself." Heath poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Those men will keep looking. A mighty fine reward means they won't give up easily." "I have nowhere else to go," Rose said softly, wrapping her fingers around the cup for warmth. "No family, no friends I can trust not to betray me to Victor." The silence stretched between them, filled with the morning sounds of birds and the gentle burble of the stream. Heath knew the sensible thing would be to leave her at the next town with whatever money he could spare. Getting entangled in her problems went against everything he'd learned about surviving out here. "The cattle drive I was joining heads to Cheyenne," he finally said. "I could still catch up if we ride hard today. The trail boss is an old friend who owes me a favor." Hope flickered in Rose's eyes. "You would take me with you?" Heath frowned. "It's no place for a woman. 2 weeks of dust, danger, and 40 cowhands with questionable manners." "I'm stronger than I look," Rose insisted. "And surely Cheyenne is far enough to make a fresh start." Heath studied her face, seeing determination beneath the fear. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "We'll try to catch the drive. But understand this, I'm responsible for getting you to Cheyenne safely. After that, we part ways. I can't afford entanglements." "I understand," Rose replied, though something in her expression suggested she saw through his brusque manner. "I won't be a burden, Mr. Wakefield." "Heath," he corrected, dousing the fire. "If we're going to survive the next 2 weeks together, we might as well use given names." They rode hard through the morning, following the trail left by the cattle drive. By midday they spotted dust on the horizon, the unmistakable sign of a large herd on the move. As they approached, Heath felt Rose tense against him. "How will you explain my presence?" she asked. Heath hadn't fully thought that through. "The truth, mostly. You're running from trouble and I'm helping you reach Cheyenne. The rest is nobody's business." The trail boss, Levi Jenkins, was a grizzled veteran of many drives. His bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hatline when Heath rode up with Rose perched in front of him. "Boy, when I said you should find yourself a wife someday, I didn't mean to bring her on my drive," Levi drawled after Heath made his awkward introduction. "She's not my wife," Heath said quickly. "She needs safe passage to Cheyenne. We had some trouble in Pinecrest." Levi scratched his beard thoughtfully. "The kind that might follow us." "Possibly," Heath admitted. The old cowboy sighed. "Your daddy saved my life at Shiloh. I reckon that means I owe his son at least one serious inconvenience." He turned to Rose. "Ma'am, this ain't going to be a pleasure trip. You'll pull your weight, same as everyone." Can you cook? Rose nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, and I can tend to basic injuries, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Good, you'll help Cookie with meals and whatever else needs doing. As for sleeping arrangements, he glanced at Heath with a raised eyebrow. I'll sleep under the stars like always, Heath said firmly. Miss Langley can have my bedroll in the chuck wagon if Cookie doesn't mind the company. And so began the strangest cattle drive Heath had ever experienced. Rose proved her worth quickly, helping the aging cook prepare meals that were a vast improvement over his usual fare. The men, initially wary of a woman's presence, soon warmed to her quiet efficiency and genuine interest in their stories. Heath found himself watching her more than was wise. There was something compelling about the way she adapted to their rough life, washing her face in cold stream water at dawn, managing her long chestnut hair with practical braids, and somehow maintaining her dignity despite the dirt and discomfort of the trail. 5 days into the drive, disaster struck. A sudden spring storm rolled in just as they were crossing a swollen river. Lightning spooked the cattle, and the herd began to scatter in panic. Heath and the other cowboys worked desperately to prevent a full stampede, while Rose and Cookie scrambled to secure the chuck wagon. Through the driving rain, Heath spotted Rose running toward the riverbank where a young calf had become stranded on a small island of land, the rising waters threatening to sweep it away. Rose, he shouted, wheeling his horse around, get back. Either she couldn't hear him over the storm, or she chose to ignore him. He watched in horror as she waded into the churning water, reaching for the frightened animal. Heath spurred Rusty forward, cursing under his breath. The river was rising rapidly, and the current could easily sweep her away. By the time he reached the bank, Rose was waist-deep in the churning water, clutching the struggling calf. Without hesitation, Heath plunged Rusty into the river. The faithful quarter horse fought against the current as they made their way to Rose. When they reached her, Heath extended his arm. "Give me the calf first," he shouted over the storm. Rose lifted the terrified animal as high as she could. Heath took it with one arm, settling it across his saddle, then reached back for Rose. With tremendous effort, she grasped his hand and he pulled her up behind him. The return to shore was treacherous. Rusty struggled against the current, weighted down by his 3 passengers. Just as they neared the bank, a floating log slammed into them. Heath felt Rose's grip loosen as she was knocked from the horse. "Heath!" she screamed, disappearing beneath the murky water. He let go of the calf, trusting Rusty to make it to shore, and dove into the river after her. The cold water shocked his system, the current tugging at his clothes. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't see her in the muddy torrent. Then his hand brushed against fabric and he grabbed hold, pulling Rose to the surface. They broke through together, both gasping for air. With one arm firmly around her waist, Heath fought against the current, kicking toward the shore where several cowboys waited to help them. Strong hands pulled them from the river and wrapped them in blankets as they collapsed on the muddy bank. "That was the damned foolish thing I've ever seen," Levi bellowed, but the concern in his weathered face belied his harsh words. "Both of you could have been killed." Rose coughed up river water, shivering violently in her soaked clothes. "The calf." "Safe," one of the cowboys assured her. "Thanks to you, miss." Heath couldn't stop staring at her, bedraggled, mud-streaked, and still more concerned about a scraggly calf than her own safety. Something shifted inside him, a crack forming in the wall he'd built around his heart. Later, huddled near the fire in dry clothes borrowed from the smallest cowhand, Rose caught Heath watching her. "Are you going to lecture me about taking foolish risks?" she asked, a hint of defiance in her voice. "Would it make any difference if I did?" Heath countered, handing her a cup of coffee laced with whiskey for warmth. A smile tugged at her lips. "Probably not." "Then I won't waste my breath." He settled beside her, closer than he usually allowed himself. "But I would like to know why you risked your life for a calf worth less than $5. Rose gazed into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "My father taught me that all life has value, Mr. Wakefield. That calf may be just one of hundreds to you, but to itself, it's everything." She turned to look at him directly. "Just as I may be just one woman running from trouble, but to me, my life and freedom are everything." Heath felt those words settle deep in his chest. "You're not just one woman running from trouble," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then Cookie called Rose to help with supper, breaking the spell. As she walked away, Heath realized with startling clarity that his determination to remain uninvolved was already in ruins. The days that followed brought new challenges. The storm had scattered some of the cattle, requiring long hours of searching through ravines and thickets to recover them. Rose insisted on helping, proving herself a capable rider on a gentle mare Levi lent her. Heath found himself pairing with her more often than necessary, telling himself it was to ensure her safety. One evening, as they searched a distant section of the range, they came across an abandoned homestead tucked into a sheltered valley. The cabin was still partially intact, though the roof had collapsed in one corner. "We should check if there's anything useful," Heath suggested as storm clouds gathered again on the horizon. "And we might need to wait out this weather." They secured their horses and approached the cabin cautiously. Inside, dust covered everything, but the main room was surprisingly intact. A table, chairs, and a small cookstove remained, along with a bed frame in the corner. "Someone left in a hurry," Rose observed, touching a cracked plate on the table. "I wonder what happened to them." Heath examined the cabin's construction with an experienced eye. "Good bones, shame to see it abandoned." Rose walked to the single window, wiping dust from the glass to peer out at the approaching storm. "It's peaceful here." Away from everything, she turned to Heath with unexpected intensity. "Have you ever thought about settling down, having a place of your own?" The question caught him off guard. "Not in a long time," he admitted. "The war took my taste for putting down roots." "The war took many things from many people," Rose said softly. "But at some point, don't we have to stop letting it take our futures too?" Before Heath could respond, the first raindrops began to fall. They quickly brought in firewood from the lean-to and started a small fire in the cookstove. As the storm intensified, they settled in, sharing the jerky and hardtack Heath carried in his saddlebags. The rain drummed on the remaining portion of the roof, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the cabin's disrepair. By unspoken agreement, they avoided the topic of what would happen when they reached Cheyenne. Instead, Rose asked about his childhood, and Heath found himself sharing memories he hadn't revisited in years. "My father had a small ranch in Missouri," he told her, watching the firelight play across her features. "Nothing grand, 20 acres, some cattle, a few horses, but it was enough. My mother kept a garden that fed us year-round, and my sister Emily could coax music from anything with strings." "They sound wonderful," Rose said. "What happened to your sister?" Heath's expression darkened. "Consumption, 2 years after my mother. I was already away fighting by then. Came home to find 2 fresh graves and a stranger living in our house. Father had died at Shiloh the year before." Rose reached across the table to touch his hand. "I'm sorry, Heath." Her touch sent warmth up his arm. "It was a long time ago." "And yet it shapes who you are today," she observed. "A man who helps strangers even when it goes against his better judgment." Heath pulled his hand away, uncomfortable with her insight. "Don't make me into something I'm not, Rose. I've done things I'm not proud of to survive." "Haven't we all?" she replied, surprising him. "The measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes but in how they choose to live with them." The rain continued through the night. Heath insisted Rose take the bed frame with his bedroll while he slept near the stove. In the quiet darkness, listening to her even breathing across the room, Heath contemplated her words. He'd spent so many years focused on survival, on not forming attachments that could be ripped away, that he'd stopped considering any other way to live. The storm cleared by morning, and they rejoined the cattle drive with their recovered strays. If Levi noticed the change between them, the way Heath stayed closer to Rose, the private smiles they exchanged, he kept his observations to himself. As they crossed into Wyoming territory, Heath began teaching Rose to shoot with his spare revolver. She proved a quick study, her aim improving daily under his guidance. "I hope I never have to use this," she said after a particularly successful practice session where she hit 6 cans in succession. So do I, Heath agreed, watching her carefully unload the weapon. But if those men catch up to us, or if you encounter other trouble in Cheyenne, I want to know you can protect yourself. Rose tucked the gun into the pocket of her borrowed trousers. The men's clothing she now wore for practicality's sake should have diminished her femininity, but somehow it only highlighted her natural grace. You still plan to leave once we reach Cheyenne then? The question hung in the air between them. Heath had been avoiding thinking about their impending separation, but the reality was inescapable. In less than a week, they would reach their destination. I go where the work takes me, he said finally, not meeting her eyes. And you need to build a new life away from your stepfather's influence. Rose said nothing more, but Heath felt the weight of unspoken words as they rode back to camp. That night, sitting apart from the others, Levi joined Heath by his small fire. You're playing a dangerous game, son, the older man said without preamble. Heath stared into the flames. I don't know what you mean. The hell you don't, Levi spat into the fire. I've seen the way you look at that girl when you think nobody's watching, and the way she looks back. It's not like that, Heath protested, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. Then what is it like? Levi challenged. Because from where I'm standing you've got two choices. Either make an honest woman of her when we reach Cheyenne or cut ties clean and ride away. Anything in between will only bring both of you heartache. Heath rubbed his face wearily. She deserves better than a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name. Maybe so, Levi agreed, rising to his feet. But seems to me she's made her choice all the same. Question is, are you man enough to make yours? The next day brought a fresh complication. A rider approached from the east, raising dust on the horizon. Heath spotted him first and rode out to intercept, hand hovering near his pistol. As the rider drew closer, Heath recognized the star on his chest, a lawman. Afternoon, the sheriff called, reining in his horse. I'm Sheriff Morgan from Pinecrest, looking for a man named Heath Wakefield. Heath kept his expression neutral. You found him. The sheriff sized him up. Got a telegram from Kansas City. 3 men claiming you kidnapped a young woman named Rose Langley. They say her stepfather is offering a $500 reward for her safe return. That's so, Heath's voice remained steady despite the cold dread settling in his stomach. And what do you think, Sheriff? I think those 3 looked like trouble, Morgan replied carefully. And I think a man who wanted to kidnap a woman wouldn't still be traveling with a cattle drive where anyone could find him. Hope sparked in Heath. So you're not here to arrest me. I'm here to warn you, the sheriff said. Those men aren't lawmen, but they're determined. Said they were headed to Cheyenne to wait for you. He handed Heath a folded paper. Also found this after they left town. Thought it might interest you. Heath unfolded the paper. A wanted poster with a crude drawing of a man named Victor Hayes, wanted in Denver for fraud, embezzlement, and suspected murder of his brother-in-law. Rose's father, seems like your Miss Langley might have more reason to run than just avoiding marriage, the sheriff observed. She doesn't know, Heath realized aloud, about her father's murder. Sheriff Morgan nodded grimly, figured as much. Those men work for Hayes. I reckon he wants the girl back before she learns the truth and stakes a claim to her father's estate. Heath's mind raced. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. One more thing, Morgan said as he turned his horse. That homestead you and the girl found, it's unclaimed land now. Previous owners died without heirs. County's looking to grant the deed to someone willing to work it. Thought you might want to know. With that cryptic remark, the sheriff tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Heath to contemplate this new information and its implications. That evening Heath showed Rose the wanted poster. Her face paled as she read the charges against her stepfather. Murder, she whispered, her hands trembling. My father's mining accident. It wasn't an accident at all. Heath sat beside her on a fallen log, away from the others. The sheriff believes Hayes killed your father to control the estate, and now he wants you back to prevent any legal challenges to his claim. Tears welled in Rose's eyes. All this time I thought I was just avoiding an unwanted marriage, but he's a murderer, Heath. He killed my father." Heath hesitated, then put his arm around her shoulders. She turned into his embrace, her tears soaking into his shirt. He held her while she grieved, feeling her pain as though it were his own. When her tears subsided, Rose looked up at him with renewed determination. "I have to go back. I have to see justice done for my father." "That's exactly what Hayes wants," Heath argued. "He'll have you killed too and make it look like another accident." "Then what do you suggest? That I keep running forever? That I abandon everything my father worked for to that monster?" Heath took her hands in his. "No, we get proof. We build a case against him that even the most corrupt judge couldn't ignore. But first, we need to make sure you're safe." "We," Rose repeated, searching his face. "You said once we reached Cheyenne we would part ways." Heath knew he was crossing a line he'd sworn never to approach again. But the thought of Rose facing her stepfather alone, or worse, never seeing her again, made his chest constrict painfully. "Plans change," he said simply. 2 days later they arrived in Cheyenne. The cattle would be loaded onto trains the following morning, but tonight the cowhands celebrated the successful drive with whiskey and card games. Heath and Rose slipped away from the festivities, heading to a modest boarding house where Heath secured 2 rooms under false names. "Stay inside with the door locked," he instructed her. "I need to send some telegrams and make inquiries." Rose touched his arm before he could leave. "Be careful, Heath. If Hayes's men are watching for us." "I'll be back before midnight," he promised. "Try to get some rest." But rest was the furthest thing from Heath's mind as he made his way through Cheyenne's busy streets. His first stop was the telegraph office, where he sent messages to contacts he'd made during the war, men who might be able to help build a case against Victor Hayes. Next, he visited a law office, speaking at length with a young but sharp-eyed attorney about Rose's situation. His final stop was the land office, where he inquired about the abandoned homestead they'd discovered. The clerk confirmed Sheriff Morgan's information. 160 acres, including water rights and the partially standing cabin, available for claim under the Homestead Act. 5 years residence to prove up the claim, the clerk explained. Improvements required, of course. He thanked him and stepped back into the street, his mind whirling with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. He was so distracted that he didn't notice the 3 men until they had him surrounded in a narrow alley. He recognized them immediately as the men from the Pinecrest saloon. "Even in, Cowboy," the tallest one said with a menacing smile. "Remember us?" Heath calculated his odds, 3 against 1 with limited room to maneuver. "Not good." "Can't say that I do," he replied, feigning ignorance to buy time. "That's funny, 'cause we sure remember you." "And that pretty little lady you stole from us," the man stepped closer. "Where is she?" "Don't know what you're talking about." A blow to the kidney doubled Heath over, while rough hands relieved him of his revolver. They dragged him deeper into the alley, away from potential witnesses. "Mr. Hayes is mighty eager to reunite with his stepdaughter," the man continued, circling Heath like a predator. "So eager, in fact, that he's come all the way to Cheyenne himself. Ain't that neighborly of him?" Heath's blood ran cold. Hayes was here in Cheyenne. Rose was in more danger than he'd anticipated. "You boys are making a mistake," Heath managed, straightening despite the pain. "I'm just a cowhand finishing a drive, don't know any Hayes." Another blow caught him in the ribs, followed by a third to his jaw that sent him sprawling to the ground. As the men closed in, Heath braced himself for the beating that would surely follow. His only hope was that Rose would remain safely hidden until he could somehow escape or be found. The sound of a revolver being cocked froze everyone in place. "Step away from him," came a steady female voice from the alley entrance. Heath looked up to see Rose standing with his spare revolver aimed at the men. Her hands were rock steady, her aim unwavering. "Well, look who came to us," the leader sneered, though Heath noticed he made no move toward his own weapon. "Mr. Hayes will be pleased." "I doubt that very much," Rose replied coldly. "Not when I tell the marshal about his involvement in my father's death." The men exchanged uncertain glances. "She's bluffing," one muttered. "She can't prove nothing." "Are you willing to bet your freedom on that?" Rose challenged. "The three of you could hang as accomplices." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Rose fired, the bullet striking the ground inches from the leader's foot. "The next one won't miss," she promised. "Now toss your guns over here and back away." To Heath's amazement, they complied, sliding their revolvers toward Rose before retreating further into the alley. "Heath, can you walk?" Rose asked, never taking her eyes off the men. He struggled to his feet, tasting blood from his split lip. "Yeah." "Good, take their guns and let's go." They backed out of the alley together, Heath collecting the discarded weapons while Rose kept her revolver trained on the men. Once they reached the busier street, they moved quickly toward the boarding house. "How did you find me?" Heath asked as they hurried through the gathering darkness. "I followed you," Rose admitted. "I had a feeling you weren't just sending telegrams." Heath should have been angry at her recklessness, but all he felt was profound gratitude. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same for me," she replied simply. "In fact, you already have." Back in the safety of the boarding house, Rose tended to Heath's injuries. Her gentle fingers cleaned the cut on his lip and examined the bruises forming on his ribs. "Nothing broken, I think," she murmured, "but you'll be sore for days." Heath caught her hand as she worked. "Rose, listen to me. Hayes is in Cheyenne. We need to leave tonight, find somewhere safe until I can contact the men who might help us build a case against him." Rose sat beside him on the narrow bed. "And where would we go?" "Those men will be watching the roads, the train station." "I know a place," Heath said, thinking of the abandoned homestead. "Somewhere they wouldn't think to look." Her eyes widened with understanding. "The cabin we found." Heath nodded. "It's unclaimed land. We could stay there while we gather evidence against Hayes. It's remote enough that his men wouldn't find us easily." "And after?" Rose asked, her gaze searching his face. "After Hayes faces justice for my father's murder, what then?" Heath knew this was the moment Levi had warned him about, the crossroads where he must either commit or walk away. For years he'd avoided attachments, convinced that caring for others only led to pain. But these past weeks with Rose had awakened something he thought long dead: hope. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That land could be claimed under the Homestead Act. 160 acres, including water rights, 5 years to prove up the claim." Rose's breath caught. "Heath Wakefield, are you proposing we become homesteaders?" "I'm proposing more than that," he said, gathering his courage. "Rose, I know we haven't known each other long, but these weeks have shown me that the life I thought I wanted, alone, drifting from job to job, isn't enough anymore." "What are you saying?" she whispered, though the hope in her eyes suggested she already knew. Heath took both her hands in his. "I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd like to claim that land together, build something permanent, as husband and wife." Joy bloomed across Rose's face, transforming her beauty into something that made Heath's heart stutter. "I thought you said the frontier was no place for attachments," she teased, though her voice trembled with emotion. "I was wrong," Heath admitted. "This is exactly the place for them. Because out here, having someone to rely on, someone to build a life with, that's not weakness, it's strength." He brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "I love you, Rose Langley. I think I have since that moment in the river when you were more worried about a $5 calf than your own life." Rose laughed through sudden tears. "And I love you, Heath Wakefield. Even when you were trying your hardest not to care about anything or anyone." Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of Heath's split lip but filled with promise. When they parted, Heath rested his forehead against hers. "So what do you say? Will you marry me and help me claim that homestead?" "Yes," Rose answered without hesitation. "But first, we have unfinished business with my stepfather." They slipped out of Cheyenne before dawn, traveling north instead of south as Hayes's men might expect. Rose wore men's clothing for the journey, her chestnut hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. They avoided main roads, following game trails and dry creek beds when possible. By nightfall, they reached the abandoned homestead. The cabin stood as they had left it, quiet and waiting in the gathering dusk. Heath helped Rose dismount, watching as she surveyed what might become their future home. "It will need work," she observed, eyeing the partially collapsed roof. "But the bones are good, you said so yourself." Heath smiled at her practical assessment. "We can start repairs tomorrow. For tonight, we'll make do with what we have." They settled in, using supplies Heath had purchased in Cheyenne before their hasty departure. As they sat by the small fire in the cook stove, Rose studying the wanted poster for her stepfather, Heath explained his plan. "My telegram went to a former Union scout I served with. He's a Pinkerton detective now, based in Denver. If anyone can gather evidence against Hayes, it's him. The lawyer I spoke with in Cheyenne is willing to represent your claim to your father's estate once we have proof of Hayes's involvement in his death." Rose looked up from the poster. "And if we can't prove it?" Heath considered this. "Then we still have this place. Hayes has no claim on you here, no legal right to force you to return. We can build our life regardless of what happens with him." Rose set the poster aside and moved to sit beside Heath. "When I ran away, all I wanted was to escape a future I didn't choose. I never imagined finding someone who would help me build a future I do want. Sir, I need a family," she had said that night in the saloon, though not to him directly. Looking at her now in the firelight, Heath realized that was what he needed too, what he had been avoiding for fear of loss. "We'll be each other's family," he promised, drawing her close. "And whoever else might come along." The next week passed in a blur of activity. They patched the roof, cleaned years of dust from the cabin, and began clearing the overgrown fields surrounding it. Heath rode to the nearest settlement to file preliminary paperwork for their homestead claim, returning with a marriage license, and a local preacher willing to perform the ceremony at their cabin. The wedding was simple, just the two of them and the preacher under the newly repaired roof. Rose wore a blue dress Heath had purchased in town, similar to the one she'd worn when they first met. Heath had splurged on a new shirt and had even shaved his light stubble for the occasion. "I, Heath Wakefield, take you, Rose Langley, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Rose repeated the vows, her eyes never leaving his. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Heath gathered her in his arms for a kiss that sealed their commitment to each other and to the life they were building together. The telegram arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a passing freight wagon. Heath's Pinkerton friend had found evidence of Hayes's embezzlement from Rose's father's mining company, along with a witness who had seen Hayes tampering with mining equipment shortly before the accident that killed Rose's father. "It's enough to bring charges," Heath told Rose as they read the telegram together. "The marshal in Cheyenne has been notified. They'll be looking for Hayes." Rose's expression was solemn. "He'll run when he hears the marshal is after him." "Probably," Heath agreed, "but he'll be a wanted man. He won't be able to threaten you anymore." She leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. "Then it's over." "Not over," Heath corrected gently, "just beginning." 3 months later, news reached them that Victor Hayes had been captured trying to cross into Mexico. He would stand trial for the murder of Rose's father, with Rose's testimony as a key piece of evidence. The journey to Denver for the trial would be their first time leaving their homestead since their wedding. The night before they were to depart, Heath found Rose standing on the porch of their now thriving cabin. Gardens had been planted, fields cleared for future crops, and a small corral built for Rusty and the mare they'd purchased from Levi before he continued north with his cattle. "Worried about seeing him again?" Heath asked, slipping his arms around her waist. Rose leaned back against his chest. "A little, but mostly I'm thinking about coming back home afterward." Home, the word warmed Heath from the inside out. This place, these 160 acres of Wyoming territory, had become more of a home in 3 months than anywhere he'd lived since losing his family. "I have something to tell you," Rose said, turning in his arms to face him. Her expression was nervous but joyful, something that will make returning home even more important. Heath raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Rose took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We'll be bringing someone back with us." "Well, not right away, but in about 6 months." For a moment Heath couldn't speak, overcome by a rush of emotions so powerful they robbed him of words. Then he lifted Rose into his arms, spinning her around as laughter bubbled from both of them. "A baby," he finally managed, setting her carefully on her feet. "Our baby." Rose nodded, eyes shining. "Our family, Heath, the one we both needed." As the stars appeared above their homestead, Heath held his wife close, marveling at how completely his life had changed. The man who had once believed the frontier was no place for attachments now found himself surrounded by the very connections he had avoided. A wife, a home, a child on the way. And rather than making him vulnerable, they made him stronger, more determined to build a future worth having. "I love you, Rose Wakefield," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, "for giving me the family I asked for that night, even though you had other plans." Heath chuckled, remembering his determination to remain uninvolved. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never planned for. As they stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, Heath knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, the trial, the continuing work of building their homestead, the adventure of parenthood ahead, they would face them together. And that made all the difference in the world.